We're focusing today on team communications, and if you're here, it's likely because you're interested in this topic. Maybe you have a challenge within your team around communication right now, or perhaps you just want to be better, more effective at communicating as a team. Whichever and whatever it is, well done to you, because you are being really conscious about how your team communicate and how you develop yourself as well as a manager, a leader, and part of a team. So congratulations on arriving here today. And we are hoping to serve you with lots of useful ideas and insight that you can take back and use straight away. Team communication, very important topic. If you're not convinced yet, the Institute of Internal Communications did a survey of 4,000 employees across the UK, and they found that where those employees rated the company internal communications as excellent, those employees were 40 points. So if we think 40% out of 100 more engaged in the culture of the company and in their work. So great communication drives engagement, and the percentage there sort of takes them from being half-hearted employees, half engaged, to really, really engaged, focused team members. So communication within your organization and within your team, absolutely key. Today then, we have an expert on hand to share their ideas, their insights, their practical tips. We're going to look at the good, the bad, the ugly of team communication, why we get it wrong, ideas about what we can do, and then, as I keep repeating, those practical tips and ideas that we can use going forward too. So who is our experts? Well, welcome, Martha.
Hi, thanks, Rich.
It's fantastic to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time. First question, lovely and open, lovely and broad. In 90 seconds or so, who are you, Martha?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, thanks for the welcome, Rich. And, it really is a pleasure to be here talking about something that I'm very passionate about. But I think in order to understand, where I'm coming from and where my passion stems from, we actually have to go way back to when I was a child. Because even as a child, I had a great desire to explore different ways of living, to learn other languages, so that essentially I could communicate with as many people as possible, anywhere. And I felt that language, was going to be as close as I could possibly get to a tangible door to reaching anyone, anywhere in the world, as there might ever be as an opportunity. So at the age of 10, I convinced my parents to ship me off to live in another French family in France for 6 months. And after completing that exchange to learn to speak French fluently, I then went and did a further 2 exchanges before I started college. After college, I went through university and then decided that the travel bug is well and truly set in, and I left the UK then after university and would be out of the UK then for the most part of my career up until 2017. Yet despite having lived and worked in 8 different countries, working with tons of different teams, multicultural teams from all around the world, I still have not satiated the drive that I have to essentially spark, nurture and enable the best kind of communication with some of the most wonderful humans on the planet.
Spark, nurture and enable some of the best communication with some of the most wonderful humans on the planet. I'm just going to scribble that line down. Lovely. I love it. I think it sums you up. We've known each other for a little while now, and the conversations we've had about these things, very deep, very interesting and engaging. But I feel they do come from a place, particularly from your side, of wanting to connect with wonderful people. So thank you for sharing your journey so far, and also that desire and that passion, because I think that's really important, particularly when combined with what you're about to share with us. Absolutely. So when it comes, go on, Martha.
No, go for it. I was just going to agree on that front. Yeah.
So when it comes to teams, then you have seen many across the globe by the sounds of it. What is the good, the bad, the ugly that you've experienced of team communication? And how did that drive your thinking and your thoughts in this area? And as you answer this question, everyone who's listening, watching, please do think about your own good, bad, and ugly experiences of team communication too. So Martha, what's your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And my experience really have shaped why I went down this path and why I became so passionate about team communication, good team communication. I think for me, the moment that I became inspired to really become an expert in this particular area was when I was in Japan. So this was back in 2016. I essentially decided I wanted to learn Japanese. That was the next language on my bucket list of which languages should I learn. And I thought, Japanese, that's different, that's interesting, that's hardcore. And on top of that, I also wanted to snowboard. See, I'm a big believer that if you can couple the things that you do for work, the things that you do for your growth with your hobbies and the things that you enjoy as well, you're onto a real winner. So I worked out that if I could get a job over in Hokkaido, which is in North Japan, then perhaps I could do both. Perhaps I could learn Japanese, perhaps I could grow as an individual and snowboard. So I was essentially hired to relaunch the food and beverage sector of a large property development company based in Niseko. Where they had a key restaurant, which was essentially, it was costing them money and they needed a total relaunch. They were property development, they weren't that versed in food and beverage and what that looks like and how to run that. So I packed my bags, jumped on a flight and embarked on my journey to my new home from home. Now, my first confusing moment was having arrived, okay, and having sort of settled in. I thought I need some groceries, right? I'd like something for dinner. So I popped down to the local little supermarket store, went in there, had a look around, everything, I was bombarded with these beautiful packets with all these wonderful, colorful symbols. And most of it meant nothing to me. Because I couldn't speak a word of Japanese at the time. And I remember looking for something, anything that I could pick out that was, something that I would recognize. I found some noodles, I found some sauce, and I thought, fantastic, right? I'll get these noodles, I'll get the sauce, it can't go wrong. Went up to the till, this lovely Japanese lady, takes the noodles, takes the sauce, and her face falls. And she looks at me very gravely. And she starts to say something in Japanese that I don't understand. So I look a little bit dumb as a foreigner, I don't understand. So then she starts gesticulating, and essentially I'm getting that there's a problem. I can't buy these items. So I'm thinking, why can't I buy these items? And all these wild thoughts go through your head. Is it because I'm a foreigner? Is it a local store? I don't know. And she tries to communicate this, and eventually she puts the items there, and off she goes into the store. A moment later, she comes back with a different sauce. And then she stands there politely at the till and waits for me to pay for my noodles and this new sauce. So I pay for my noodles and the new sauce and I scurry out of there. And this has left me feeling confused, but hey-ho, it's an interesting cultural experience. I'm not fazed, okay? It hasn't really cost me anything. I've got a different sauce. Hey-ho, well, I've got some dinner. But it wasn't until my next confusing moment, right? When I had ordered all of the things that we needed for the relaunch, okay? I'd ordered them through this lovely, very friendly, very helpful Japanese supplier that had been recommended to me through the company. And we got to Thursday before the Saturday massive relaunch. And we had no supplies. So we scrambled. And we made it. We got through the launch, done deal. Now, after the panic had sort of subsided, I was in the back of house with our head chef talking about how, our Japanese suppliers are unreliable, right? Our Japanese suppliers are really unreliable. And I was talking about the experience and what we do moving forward, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a voice comes out the back of the kitchen. Would you like some insight? Turns out my conversation with the head chef had been overheard by one of our Japanese chefs, one of our Japanese team members. And she was offering me insight into what had really happened. And her response was what essentially put me on this path to creating these courses, this how do I impart this insight, this information to other people so they don't fall on my silly, naive mistakes in the same way that I did. Because up until that moment, I'd essentially, have described myself as a good communicator. well-traveled, good at adapting to different cultural situations. You know, I ticked all the boxes. I was versed in project management, and yet I still experienced a cultural communication failure that nearly cost us the launch. And so I was interested, to say the least, in any insight that she could provide. And I realized in that moment that language isn't everything, as my 10-year-old self might have once thought. I realized that, you know, communication, really good communication, goes much, much deeper than the language, the things that I'm saying. I realized that what I would discover in those weeks and months following, listening to that voice from the kitchen, would be super powerful in enabling me to not make those same errors again. And essentially after that experience, I was determined to help other teams to communicate well in any cultural setting, because we make assumptions all of the time about the meaning of the behavior that we're seeing from somebody else.
So what was this mystical wisdom, this insight that you received in the kitchen? What was it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great question. You know, so essentially what she said to me in that moment astounded me, but it wasn't until it described to me over the weeks and months following that I fully understood the big why. So what she said to me in that moment is, your Japanese supplier told you that they wouldn't be able to come through. And I said, no, they didn't. Okay. And so it would take the weeks and months following that to understand the whys of that. And I think, you know, this is what's really fascinating, those whys, and the questions. I'm so passionate about those why questions. And what I want to do is to empower individuals and teams to actually be able to answer those why questions for themselves. But in order to do that, you know, as an individual, you have to start with being able to understand the context, the culture, the wider why. So she told me, your Japanese supplier told you, made it known that that wasn't going to be possible. But that information alone to me isn't enough. I don't understand why. You know, what's the wider why? How? He said yes to me. No, he didn't. So what's going on there? And so answering questions like that, the why, so you know, why did it go wrong, is a bit like treating the symptoms, right, of the things that we see. And what I want to do is essentially empower people to be better, healthier communicators all by themselves through understanding that wider context, so that you can answer those smaller why questions for yourself then as they arise.
Cool. So there is always this wider context at play in our communications. And as you're talking, I'm listening to your example of the restaurant in Japan, but I'm thinking of things in my career when I've had miscommunication, I've had frustration on my side, frustration from other people because communication hasn't been right or worked. And ultimately, as I play these things through in my head now, looking back, there was always context. There was something going on more widely, either in the scenario or who that person was and who I was at the time, that's influencing all of this. So I hear you when you say helping people discover that why. When we come to team communications then, before, I think you're going to share with us more about this why, but sort of diagnosing or recognizing the symptoms perhaps of when team communication goes bad. What, in your experience, are the differences in teams that communicate well and those that don't? Is it just this why thing, or is there something more to it? Tell me more.
So, you know, as you just mentioned, you know, there's lots of different situations where, you know, communication can go well or it can go badly. And there's lots of different tiny nuances or differences of, you know, situation, person, you know, could be, you know, lots and lots of different things that can influence that. However, I strongly believe that in situations where communication goes well for teams, there are always three factors at play. And those three factors in my mind are, number one, the team is prepared to adapt their communication for the situation. So it requires that the team and every member of that team is willing to flex. Okay, because, and this is factor 2 now, they understand that there are always different rules at play. Okay, and that these different rules that are at play need to be amalgamized, right? So that we're all playing from the same rule book. And thirdly, then, the third factor is the teams that actually really understand the fullness of their objective in a way so clearly that they could describe that to anybody else. And it seems really obvious, but it's amazing how many times I work with teams and we talk about communication, whether it's cross-cultural or whether it's simply, a team of Brits who are struggling with their communication, and they're not performing to a high standard that they want to be. There's those cracks are appearing, there's some confrontation, there's some siloed working and all these sorts of things. It often comes down to we've made an assumption, right, about what the objective is and therefore what the biggest, most important pieces of that are. And it's not until people start making decisions that you start to see people veering off in different directions, because their understanding of what that key objective is actually differs subtly. And so, those really for me are the 3 really big factors that contribute to really great team communication. But of course, those will manifest differently between different teams based on those things I mentioned: length of service, previous relationship that they might have, experience that they might have within that team or within that working environment, that industry. But more and more, I think the ability to actually understand how effective communication happens in an atypical situation or a global setting across cultures is essentially paramount. So, because we have the rise in hybrid working, for example, so people are more likely to be working with a global team. They're more likely to have colleagues that are based in other geographical locations. So having that understanding, what actually contributes to effective communication in a team, in any setting, is a really critical skill. So being able to identify the unhelpful ethnocentric behaviors and essentially successfully replace them with helpful ethnorelative attitudes and approach is a huge advantage for teams in business today.
Cool. So what I'm hearing is there are these 3 things that all successful teams have when they're communicating well. They're willing to adapt, they understand that there are different rules at play, and they have a real clarity of objective and the goal, and they're all really understanding of that. But assumptions, culture, the fact we are all different individual people cloud that. And this is something called ethnocentrism, ethnorelativity. I'm saying those words very carefully because they're hard for me to get out between my lips. Tell us more about this ethnorelativity, ethnocentrism thing. What is it and how can we use it as team leaders?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, they're really fun words for sure. But don't worry, they're not as complicated as they sound. So ethnorelativism, what is it? So ethno actually comes from the Greek, and it actually means nation or people. And then you've got relativism, which essentially is the belief that there is no absolute truth, only the truth that a particular individual or a culture happen to believe, right? So likely, we all mostly happen to sit in the same boat of the belief that, a webinar starts at 12:30, and we've said that we're finishing at 1:30. So, that's what's happening. But that's not the belief held by everyone. Essentially, ethnorelativism is an acquired ability to see many values and behaviors as cultural rather than universal. Now, most of us adopt an ethnocentric kind of mindset most of the time, right? Because there's no real reason not to. We often simply don't realize that there is an alternative. Adopting an ethnorelative approach requires education, right? It requires someone to come along and shine a light on the questions that we should be answering, the things that we're missing, the things that we're unaware of, the assumptions that we're making. It requires information and it requires understanding of that information. Essentially, being ethnocentric is, can be as simple as failing to accept that there are other norms, right? And taking the time to discover what those are. So to give you an example, I have a friend, and her husband is originally from Kenya. They spend half their time in the UK and half their time over in Kenya. And he actually runs a church over in Kenya. And he would start the service normally. So service is set to start at 10 o'clock in the morning. But if he's in the middle of talking to somebody from the church, he won't start at 10. Maybe he'll start at 10 past 10. Maybe he'll start at 10:15. He will continue to talk to that person. It's also the reason why my mum, who went and did her doctorate at Stanford University, found it super easy to move over to America to join the university. She had a great time. She found it really easy, that switch. And for the same reasons that my grandpa, who ran a school in London, was headmaster of school in London, and had interns coming from America to teach at his school, found it very, very difficult. The interns found it incredibly difficult to make that switch to teaching in the UK for the same reasons that my mum found it so easy to go and study at Stanford University. And essentially, you've got on the one side ethnocentric behaviours, and on the other side ethnorelative behaviours. It might be useful if everybody's interested. I can quickly kind of run through what those look like and some of the behaviours you might start to see to understand, okay, what is ethnocentric attitude or behaviour, and what does it look like when you start going towards the positive side, the ethnorelative style behaviours. So on the left, you've got, denial. So when you're behaving or adopting an ethnocentric kind of mindset, it starts with denial. And this is essentially can be conscious denial, but often it's just the unconscious denial. So I don't even know there's a question I'm not asking. I don't even realize that there's something that I'm unaware of, right? Here is when we start to make the assumption that everyone is essentially playing by the same rules, right? So I might assume that, toilet paper is a universal norm, not a cultural one. I might assume that everybody attending this webinar knows that 12:30 means 12:30. Then we have things that we would class into like the defense category. And this is where you might see behaviors or things, or you might find yourself having these sort of thoughts. Perhaps you're on a road trip through France. You pull up at a service station for a comfort break, and you find a flushable hole in the ground. How ridiculous, you think. Is this the dark ages, you might scoff. Perhaps you even, do a quick snap and send a text message to your mate back in the UK going, OMG, I stopped, for a quick sort of loo break. Look what I found, and I thought we were backwards, right? So those would be attitudes and behaviors that fall into the defense category. And the defense category is essentially where we are starting from the place of, I am superior. The way that I do things is the right way to do things. It is better than. And anything that we find different or strange, we label as stupid, silly, and all of those sorts of things. Then we have things like minimization, which is essentially, I don't understand why my Dutch colleague has to be so rude. Nobody wants to receive feedback like that. Why is it so hard to just be civil, right? That would be a minimization type of thinking. Where we basically go, well, there is one way of doing things, and obviously that's the way to do it. And there really isn't any difference between the way that I work and the way that my Dutch colleague works. So why is it why is there any difficulty? Just get with the program. Then we would move into what we call positive ethnorelative behavior. So this is the thinking, as we said, ethnorelativism, right, is the belief that there are no absolute truths, only the truths that a particular culture or a group of people are believing at the time, okay? And this is something that is a skill that we have to learn. And it starts with acceptance, right? And the key here with acceptance is knowledge and understanding, right? With which you can then start to actually adapt your style. If you're not aware of, you can't then adapt to. And then finally, if you're able to start adapting, you can start to actually embrace and integrate all of those wonderful differences that you've become aware of to actually build the strongest hybrid team that you could possibly be.
Wow, again, as ever, my brain is fizzing, but I'm reflecting on my own teams that I've worked with, teams that I've led, and regretting, I think in some ways, often being ethnocentric, trying to make everybody conform to probably white British male culture way of running a team, I guess, really. And thinking about interactions I had, particularly one team member from Eastern Europe, and they were within the team, and it felt like every time they communicated with me or called, they would highlight all the things that weren't right with what we were doing and how we could be doing it better if we just threw everything out the window and started again and did it like this. And I always felt attacked, and like this person was trying to burn down everything we'd built and change and always destroy things, whereas actually thinking now, I was probably being very ethnocentric, but for that person from that culture, that was a positive communication, that was a constructive conversation that didn't come with any of the assumptions that I had in my mind. What kind of things vary between cultures? What elements? So you've talked a bit about timekeeping. I've thought about conflict. Are there certain things we can measure that vary between different cultures or different people even within our teams?
Absolutely. And, you're absolutely right. The comment you made there about, the assumptions that we're making, I think this is key. We constantly make assumptions based on our understanding, based on our unconscious biases, based on our previous experiences and all of these things. And assumptions can be great things, by the way. They help us all of the time. If not, we wouldn't get through the day. If you had to go into a room and constantly ask yourself, that thing over there that looks like a chair, can I sit on it? Is it going to break? I'm not sure. Maybe I'll approach it carefully, have a little look, size it up. Maybe I'll slowly lower myself in and see. If we had to do that with absolutely everything constantly, by the end of the day, our brains would be completely burnt out. So assumptions are really helpful tool, making assumptions, but there's a point where it starts to actually be unhelpful. And this is where we need to uncover where those assumptions are coming and any unconscious bias that those assumptions are feeding. So you're absolutely right. There's timekeeping. If you come from a culture where it's linear timekeeping, so 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock, you're making the assumption that in order to be a good, productive, reliable colleague, you arrive at 9 o'clock if that's the mandated time. And so then you might make the assumption in for cultures that isn't the case. It's different. You might start to make those unconscious biases against those that arrive at 9:10 and start labeling that as, they're unreliable, they're not prioritizing, they're not valuing other people's time, they're lazy, they're this, they're that, they're unable to sort of stick to a deadline, whatever these things are, right? We start to give all these things labels, and it starts to grow into this picture of who this person is based off of our incorrect initial assumptions. But there's other things too, right? So there's things understanding low-high context communication. So how do people communicate? There's, how do you build trust? How do you build relationship? What's the pecking order? Who's calling the shots? How do we manage confrontation, feedback? How do we view, deadlines, projects, responsibility, ownership? And personality too comes into this. It's not just some of these big differences that you might really clearly see through cultures. There could be differences simply between your British colleagues that come under different ways, preferred ways of working through different relationship styles, different communication styles.
Yeah, there's so much to it, in so many things to consider. And we've talked about between nationalities, cultures, countries, but you're absolutely right there. In terms of our teams in the UK, they don't necessarily have to be hybrid or spread across the globe. There's going to be so much diversity of culture and ways of working, ways of being in there that we need to adapt to. And now I get into my practical mode of, well, as team managers, as leaders, how do we even find out what people's preferences are or where they are culturally on this kind of ethno scale? Where do we start?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really great question. I think if you look at that scale there, the first point of call, and this is what I was saying in those three key factors of what makes teams successful when they communicate, and that from those sets them apart from those that don't. And this is essentially uncovering those unspoken rules at play. So it's getting out of that denial place that we may unconsciously be in. We may just simply just be unaware there's a question that I should be asking myself, unaware that there's a different norm that may be at play here, unaware that, you know, my colleagues might have a different preference, or, you know, might see minute taking as something that happens in a completely different way to how we, you know, the norm of how I would do it here in the UK, for example. But I think, you know, I think the catalyst for sometimes sort of that sit up, wake up call, like I experienced in Japan, is often where we see either missed opportunity or near misses, right? And that could be through timescale, you know, so speed of execution. That could be relational stuff, you know, collaboration, favors in the bank, security, future projects, even could be, you know, leg up in business or career. It could be missed opportunity from a monetary perspective, you know, so potential work or bids. It could be missed opportunity in terms of expansion or growth through, you know, reputation, brand, your expertise, knowledge, strategic prowess, even negotiation, right? So we start to see some of these symptoms that we don't want to see, that are the catalyst for us going, oh, hang on a minute, why? And we start asking those questions, why, that I talked about in the beginning. But in order to actually be able to start unpicking and coming up with an answer that's helpful to us, you need somebody in the party who can actually explain, who has the knowledge to explain why from that wider context. Right. So for me in Japan, it was that voice from the kitchen, who, you know, this wonderful Japanese colleague who was from Japan, but she had also spent a lot of time working in Europe, which gave her a unique perspective of both of those cultures, both of the differences, both of the context, to be able to explain, okay, so you've come at it from over here, and from Japan, we do things like this, and here's how you got to this end result, which was way more empowering than her simply telling me, this, you know, happened X, Y, Z, this is what you need to do next time. Because then it gave me that understanding, so that in future conversations, I could go, she mentioned about this. This is the context. This is what might be happening because of X, Y, Z that I now understand. So I start to be able to answer my own smaller why questions then as I go along, which is what's really, really powerful.
Nice. So we need one person to become aware, to become ethnocentrically conscious, and to highlight where these discrepancies are and to begin solving them. Yes. And I think that's a really valuable point. Again, for the people that are here today, hey, you'll have one person within your team, your organization, who can now look at this and begin to resolve any of those conflicts, if you will, that are happening on an ethno basis. But also, it means that once you do that, it spreads to the rest of the team. So it should ripple through your organization once everybody becomes aware of the facts that there are these assumptions and factors at play from a cultural perspective. They'll all become conscious and start making positive changes too. But it does kind of ring an alarm bell in my head about, this is all great, being inclusive and adapting, etc. But as an organization, if a meeting starts at 12:30, using your timing example, we do need to start at 12:30 and we do need everybody to be there. So how do we operate in this ethno-relative way in an organization where there are going to be standards that might contradict with some cultural norms or preferences?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really, really great question. You know, in an ideal world, it'd be fantastic, wouldn't it, to be able to essentially cater to everybody's preference, and make sure that, you know, everybody was able to work in the style that best suited them, etc. But we all know that the reality is that it's a lot more messy than that. It's often we're constrained by things which are mandated through our particular organization, through the industry that we work in, or, you know, all of those different elements. And so there are going to be situations where, you know, actually there is a very specific set of rules that we all need to play by. And I think the key here is understanding that in order to get everybody to there, if that's your, you know, if that's your B point and everyone's starting from an A point, in order for everyone to move from point A to point B and all be playing by those same rules, there are two things that need to happen. The first one is that we need to actually expose the different rules that might already be at play. Because remember, people are often behaving from an ethnocentric standpoint without even realizing it, because there's no real need to realize it until something comes and sort of smacks you in the face and you go, oh my goodness, that's different. And so in order to do that, we have to expose those rules at play, and we have to verbalize them. We have to make everybody aware that, hey, look, we have this team, and in this team we have, you know, so-and-so, and they're from this culture, and in that culture it may be that time's a little bit more flexible, okay? And then we have so-and-so over here who's from this culture, and for them time may seem like this. Or we get each of those individuals to share that for themselves. But essentially what we're doing here is we're exposing rules that people may not be aware of that are already at play. So we're making people aware that there's different rules here. Then what we need to do is shift everybody then forwards to go, hey, in this organization, in this setting, here's the rules that we are as a team going to follow. And here is where why becomes really powerful. Obviously, in order to get the best buy-in from a team, if you can involve teams in decision making so they feel included, you're going to get better buy-in, you're going to get better accountability and all those things. Sometimes though, we aren't able to give the choice to the team. We go, actually 9 o'clock, that's when the meeting starts, and that's how it has to be. And so this is where then the why is really powerful to get that same buy-in, essentially explaining why is that really important in this business setting, in this particular industry, for this particular team. Right? Because we're much more likely as human beings to get behind something if we understand a really compelling reason why. So instead of me just mandating, hey, that's great, you're all coming from different cultures, you've all got different ideas, but 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. Instead of simply mandating that, I can explain the reasons why. And then you're much more likely to get that buy-in. So firstly, number one, you need to expose those unseen rules. Make people aware that there are different rules. That's really powerful. And then you come in with, here's the rule that we're going to adopt as a team, and here's the really powerful reason why that's important.
Fantastic. I love how this has all come together, because at the very beginning you said successful teams that communicate well are willing to adapt. They understand there's different rules at play. They understand in fully the objectives. And then we came back to, well, actually, how do we make sure that all these cultures come together and work together well within an organizational setting? And you said we need to shine a light and highlight that we need to be willing to adapt. We need to understand that there are different rules at play, and we need to make sure we shine a light on making sure we're all clear on our objectives. So it's all coming together, what we need to do as team leaders. Can you sum it up for us then, Martha? And I challenge each of our speakers at our webinars to do this. Further thinking, further ideas, 3 practical tips for our leaders, managers to take away today so that they can boost their team communication. Can you summarize those 3 practical tips for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've talked a lot about this knowledge base. And as you can see here, we've got what I call the intercultural competence pyramid, right? And the idea here is we're all trying to climb towards having higher intercultural competence. And there's layers to that. And it starts with that foundation of knowledge. So the 3 really key things that I think that anyone can start from today, that you can go away today and start doing, that will help you to build that intercultural competence is, 1, do something that helps you to shine that light to uncover what those unspoken rules are, because often we're not even aware that they're at play. And this is where those frustrations often come in, especially if it's with colleagues from the same culture, because we're not prepared for that. We're not expecting that you, Rich, have a different way of working than I do, perhaps. You know, when I went to Japan, I was expecting that there were going to be some differences in terms of, cultural approaches to things. Sure, it still caught me blindsided, but I was expecting it, right? So I wasn't shocked in the same way that, had that occurred in the UK. Imagine I'd gone to, a supermarket in the UK, and I'd gone to the till with my noodles and with my sauce, and the cashier had, said to me, no, you can't buy that sauce. I would not be expecting that cashier to wander off to aisle 6 and come back with another sauce and put it down in front of me and wait for me to pay for it. I would not be expecting that in the slightest. So I think, that first thing is to do something. What can you do in your team to help to shine a light on where are those unconscious biases, where are some of those rules at play that we may not even be aware of, where we differ, where we have a differing understanding of how this game is going to play out. And this comes into, you know, that first stage of the ethno-relative behavior, that kind of acceptance piece, because we can't start to accept it if we don't know what it is. And we can do this, right, by being curious, by asking probing questions, observing first before making assumptions or jumping to conclusions. But ultimately, we need that knowledge base. We need a bit of that education. Someone has to understand what's actually going on to answer that question. The second thing is we need to practice flexibility, right? So we can start by simply pushing ourselves to try a new working method or strategy. Push ourselves out of our comfort zone to actually start to flex, right? Now, there's a safe way to do this, and that's with a culture that you already understand, okay? Now, some of you may have already done things like personality styles. You might be familiar with the red, blue, green, yellow personality types or communication style preferences. You might have done Myers-Briggs, you might have done DISC, you might have done something through your organization already. So you might have an awareness already of your personality style or your working preference. And so understanding that, and then understanding that of a colleague, and trying to push yourself to adapt your style to better suit your colleague from the same culture, right? So from a culture you understand, will already push you into a place where you go, oh, this feels a little bit uncomfortable, right? But it's a little bit more safe because you already understand the culture, so you're less likely to make any big errors, right? But then the third one would be essentially, how can you start on the journey of creating shared rules, okay? And this, to do this successfully, you need open, flat hierarchy of discussion. You need the mindset, everyone needs to have the mindset of seeing my norms as just one possibility. Not superior, not better than, just one possibility. And the result, if you can achieve those two things, your result will be a consensus as to how could we as a really healthy hybrid team, you know, capitalize on all of the amazing differences that we have within our team and create one amazing set of rules that works for us moving forward in our team communication.
I love it. So we've got build your knowledge and shine a light on what's happening within the team as number one, with curious probing questions. Number two, practice flexibility, test and try those different approaches to make sure you're adapting. It starts with you as a team leader, and then forming those shared rules, having that open, flat hierarchy of discussion as a team to create those norms and those ways of working. Cool. Rich, old Rich, young Rich, early manager Rich could have done with lots of this, and I'm sure there's lots of senior leaders as well that aren't conscious and aren't taking this approach going forward. So there's been so much value. Thank you, Martha, for sharing everything today. One thing I didn't mention at the start, and I perhaps should have, was we do have some questions from our audience. So those people who signed up nice and early, they got an email offering them the opportunity to send in their questions on the back of a postcard for Martha. So I've got three here to run through with you that I think will draw out even more insight. But those people who are with us today, if you want to add any questions you have into the chat now, we'll try and get through as many of those as we can in the next few minutes before we finish. So, Martha, question number one, and excuse me while I read because I don't want to get this one wrong. I have a team that are split across countries and time zones. I regularly have to give them updates either in writing or on a video call. How can I adapt my style for all of their different cultural needs if they all like to communicate in different ways?
Really, really great question, and fits so nicely with what we've just been talking about. I think the key here, not to sound like a broken record, but the key here is you've got two options. If you have really, really good rapport with all of those team members, you have the opportunity to create those shared rules together as a group. So essentially to provide a forum where you expose all of those differences in preference. Perhaps, you know, you get everybody to actually talk about what their preferences or their working norms from their particular culture, from their particular industry, from their particular geographical location, which serves two purposes, right? One, you actually expose those differences, so you make people more culturally aware, so you start them thinking from an ethnorelative perspective, right? Oh, that's obviously not a universal norm, that's a cultural norm, what I like to do over here. But secondly, it's a great way to also build more rapport with the team, build more understanding with the team. So to give you an example of this, when I was working in Japan, we had on our team lots of people from all different cultures around the world, German, French, Spanish, USA, UK, Japanese, French Canadian, and Australian as well. And we had a French Canadian working with one of our Japanese colleagues, and they both came to me separately, essentially to say, look, I don't want to work with this person. I refuse to turn up on shift if I'm going to have to work alongside them. Because the French Canadian girl, she saw the Japanese colleague as lazy and inept. That was her thinking. Okay, they're lazy and inept. And the Japanese girl saw the French Canadian as essentially, super bossy and really just a bully. So they were like, no, not going to work together. I won't be treated like that. And it took, sitting them down to expose the wider context of the different cultures they were coming from, and therefore the assumptions they were making about the behaviors they were seeing from each other, to understand that why, right, to go, right, the way that you're behaving, you're not trying to bully me, it's because of XYZ, right? The things that you're doing, it's not trying to be, lazy, it's actually because of XYZ, right? And so it took exposing those whys, letting them talk to each other to explain their cultural differences, the way their norms, their rules, that then allowed them to kind of appreciate each other more and go, oh, right, I see what value you bring to the table. I see you as a whole now, aside from those biases I had, aside from the assumptions that I was making. But obviously you need someone who understands the different cultures, right, to be able to help them see where something is a cultural thing and not just an assumption we're pinning to a behavior that we're seeing that's different. So firstly, I would be either getting the team together to be able to do that, to build that, joint understanding, or I would do that myself if I felt that I had a good enough sort of grasp of those different cultures to explain that to the team. If it was a setting where I had little rapport, little time, it wasn't appropriate, I may simply have to start with that why of, hey, everybody, all of us have different working styles. All of us have different preferences. In the setting that we're working now, here's the ground rules of how we're going to play. This is what we're going to do. This is the compelling reason why we're going to do that. So going back to what I said, either you allow the team to come to that conclusion themselves and build their new set of rules. Sometimes that's not possible. Then you need to expose the different rules that are already at play. We've got to label them. We've got to, bring them to the light of day to avoid confrontation, disappointment, frustration later. And then we go, okay, here's the blank slate. Here's the new rules that we are going to play with moving forward.
Nice. I like that. And what I'm taking from that particularly is that idea that there will be times when we need to communicate in a certain way and we might need to get things done quickly, but explaining that why very briefly means we can overcome some of the kind of cultural assumptions and calamities and conflicts that might happen with communication. And then on the longer term, we can build our understanding and our awareness as a team and those sets of rules.
Absolutely. And it doesn't have to be, it can all sound very complicated and overwhelming. There are a lot of things that are, once you understand them, are quite simple and underpinning the key core aspects that we need to understand that give us the power to then understand the small whys as they go along. And sometimes we don't have the time to describe each and every culture in depth, but sometimes the first powerful step is simply to go, we're all aware that everybody's coming from a different starting point. Maybe we don't have the expertise to adequately describe what all of those are. That's okay. The first starting point is simply to make everybody aware that actually everybody is probably coming from a different set of norms, and that is okay. But let's just clarify which set of norms that we will be using.
Nice. Now, Martha, I had more questions, but you have this fantastic way of explaining the concepts and the ideas so thoroughly and from different perspectives that you've answered them all. So they're gone. They would go out the window, but not close enough to go out the window. So before we finish, my final question for you was, in that restaurant kitchen in Japan, there was the wise voice offering you insight about why the Japanese supplier said, I can't do that, and you heard yes. Can you just explain to us what was happening there then? What were the cultural differences that meant that you heard yes and the Japanese supplier was saying no? Just to complete the loop on that tale.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, people are always super curious. So obviously, let's just pre-frame this with, you know, we have a couple of minutes and I don't want to do the Japanese culture a disservice. So I'm going to put this into a nutshell, but take this with a pinch of salt, because this is just a little snapshot into a very small fragment of the wider Japanese culture. But some of you may be aware that, you know, lots of Asian cultures, face saving is really, really important. And what I mean by face saving is the ability, desire, and need to protect reputation above all else. So your reputation and my reputation, because in Asian cultures, I represent myself, my family, my community, the business that I work for, the industry that I work for, Japan as a whole, for example. So everything that I do, right, is feeding into all of those different things, right? So there's a much bigger responsibility on me than perhaps there is in the UK. Where we have more of a laissez-faire kind of attitude of, you know, you do you, right? And so face saving is really important. So, you know, business relationship and the face saving of that business relation, equally really important. So my lovely, wonderful Japanese supplier was making it known to me in the way that Japanese are able to make it known, that they weren't able to fulfill that list within that deadline, whilst also saving our business relationship by nodding and saying yes, whilst making it known that that was not possible. And this really threw me, because, you know, for me, you know, coming from a fairly direct, you know, relatively, comparatively direct culture to the Japanese culture, which is much more indirect, I was, you know, could you just not have said, no, we can't do it? You know, I mean, everything's super easy. And, you know, it made me laugh when I became a little bit more versed in the Japanese culture and learned some things and realized how naive and silly I'd been. It did make me laugh, you know, that the Japanese, you know, actually have an expression for us foreigners who go and can't read the air. You know, they have a word, kukiyomenai, which essentially means someone who can't read the air, because they're making it known. You know, they are telling you, but just not in the way that a direct culture like the UK comparatively could understand.
Oh. Thank you, Martha. Kuki Yamanai, reading the air. I now am going to take the time to read the air, recognize that we have just a few minutes left and people will have places to be and things to do this afternoon. I'd like to finish by saying thank you, Martha, for sharing everything you've shared with us today, and highlighting to everybody that we will share the recording of this with you, and we will make sure that there are some key notes, there are some key sheets to remind you, to get you working through those practical steps you can take to make sure that you are a little less ethnocentric and boost your team communication. We've kept this full of value and full of insight. The sales pitch is about the next 10 seconds, and it is simply to say that Martha is one of the experts that are within the Further team, and she works with our clients, highlighting, training, supporting them to understand the different factors that are in play when teams communicate, both across cultures and in UK-based teams, and to work out those rules of engagement, those ways of communicating and overcome those conflicts, and to be super communicators. So if you'd like to work with her on that basis, whether it's your senior team, range of teams across your organization, then please do contact me and we'll make sure you are in touch. Thank you for joining us. It's been delightful. I've learnt a lot, and I look forward to seeing you at our next further webinar. Thank you.